Yeah, it's really choppy today. It's very, very odd. It's very choppy. All right, look, got it. Yay. There we go.
It's our low tech held together with gaffer's tape. Laura is.
We're doing the best we can.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning.
Wow, this is slow. This is so slow. It is like not pulling them up. So we're just gonna have to leave it on this. Well, we want to start our video. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We're good.
Good morning.
Okay.
We will start in just a few. Want to give some more Girl Scouts and Girl Scout parents, troop leaders, volunteers to join. So we'll start in just a few. But welcome. We are happy to have you on this morning.
Thank you.
Stop, just ignore it.
You're welcome.
It is doing its thing.
It's over. While we're waiting, if y'all want to put in the chat where you're joining us from, so we can know where everybody is located.
This bench right here has to stay here. That's yeah. That's how I'm gonna do my activities. And we're starting with that? No, that's the last thing. I'm at the very end of it.
All right, we got some girls from Columbia and Aiken. Awesome.
Stop this video. There we go. Because that's the video we're going to focus on.
And again, we'll get started in a few. Just waiting for some other girls to join in.
I don't care about that. I care about this.
And we do want to remind everyone during today's event, if you will stay muted, we are recording our event today and we will post later this week. So just make sure that you're staying muted until we get to the Q&A and fun activities section.
What was the reception?
It was pretty good.
Oh, good. Okay.
I particularly went today and I was like,
All right.
Alan Schumann.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Got about one more minute, Kyle, and then we can get started. Again, thank you all for joining us. We're super excited to have you a part of our one of our signature programs today. And we got about one more minute before we get started.
Can I do an audio test real quick? Audio test?
Absolutely.
Good.
All right, so we ready to get started? I think I just saw two other people get on, so let's give them a second for their connections to come in and we'll get started.
Perfect.
All right, I think they're all on. All right, so good morning. I was about to say good afternoon, but it's still morning. It's just 11 a.m. So welcome to Girl Scouts of South Carolina, Mountains and Midlands, a voice of her own South Carolina women in politics. I am super duper excited to be here. So when I was like putting the PowerPoint together, right? And when y'all get old enough, y'all have to put PowerPoints together for school, and they're really fun because then you have to put them together as adults. So when you put them in school, like take that very seriously. But anyway, I found this lady, her name was Susan B. Anthony. She's absolutely amazing in the fight for women's rights. She said a quote, she said, "There should never be another reason of silence where women have the same rights men have on this green earth." And I thought that was like super duper dope for this moment. So before we actually get started, I came across this video, and then for the life of me, technology wants to act up, and it doesn't want on. All right, so let's play this video before we get started.
The right of citizens of the United States to vote
shall not be denied or abridged by the United States
or by any state on account of sex.
In thinking about the 19th Amendment's passage, where no women were sitting in Congress, thinking about where they had come since the first convention in Seneca Falls in 1848, you find in their writings and in their advocacy and in their marches and in their hunger strikes and their petitions an incredible, deeply devoted desire to change the world to the good. We're so fortunate here at the National Museum of American History to have in our collection remarkable material, some put into the museum by the very women who won the right to vote in 1920. That helps us tell the long arc of struggle and of sacrifice and of dogged determination. And this project in which senators and congresswomen reflect upon their roles now is, in my mind, part of a grand continuum of women's advocacy to be represented, to be heard, and to be equal partners, not just in families, but in the very nation itself.
When I was first elected to the Senate in 1992, there were only 2 women in the Senate. The election was dubbed the Year of the Woman because 4 women were actually elected to the Senate. Today, that number stands at 26.
When I was elected to the Tennessee State Senate in 1998, I quickly realized I was a caucus of 1. I was the only Republican woman in the room. Now, I am one of 26 women in the United States Senate.
When young girls see women sitting in powerful positions, it tells them they can do the same thing in their career. It's amazing what happens each time we shatter a glass ceiling.
We know this. We need to encourage female leaders in their communities to step up and take on the challenge of running for public office.
Today, we look across the landscape of women's activism and we see what we call intersectionality, which means we have women of multiple backgrounds, multiple races, multiple ethnicities, and multiple perspectives fighting for a broad set of powerful and ongoing struggles. That wasn't always the case. So the activism that you see then leading up to the 19th Amendment is in many respects the same activism we see today. The work that lies ahead of us is to continue to broaden to the deepest and most expansive and most inclusive frame possible that all women, regardless of where they are, what color they are, where they're from, are not denied or abridged in their capacities to vote.
I thought that was a really dope video, man. Hopefully you got something out of it. So, hey, welcome. So it says, what will you do for women's suffrage? I know it's Girl Scouts, so y'all a bunch of young girls, a bunch of volunteers who are women. So what will you do to continue that women have the same rights, the same access, the same equity and equality that men have. And again, this was just 100 years ago, women were not given the right to vote. So look how far we've come in just a short period of time. So I am your host. My name is Kyle A. Green, and the A stands for awesome. I feel awesome on, no, not really. The A stands for Aubrey. My mom, she named me Aubrey, but I do feel awesome on today. I am super duper excited to be your host on today. And so our women's suffrage team consisted of me, Kyle A. Green, and Lindsay Robinson. She didn't give me her middle initial, you know, but I like using mine, man. We put this together for y'all, and hopefully you enjoy a voice of our own, South Carolina women in politics. Here's today's agenda. You met me, you met the host. We will have a welcome and introduction by Lindsay, and she will introduce our curator on today. And we'll end it with some question and answer, and we'll have a fun activity. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Lindsay.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you. So I have the pleasure, and we can go to the next slide. I have the pleasure of introducing some amazing women from the South Carolina State Museum. So first we have Laura Ibarra Kane. Laura has been in informal education for over 15 years. Wow, that's a long time. With roughly 10 of those years at the State Museum. For those of you who are not familiar with the State Museum, it is literally across the street from our Girl Scout Leadership Center. Beautiful building. Laura is an advocate for girls in science. She spends most of her time tinkering and experimenting. She is also the museum's robot lady, I like that name, and loves coding. More than anything, she loves working with all the children and families who visit the museum and hopes to inspire wonder and curiosity in everyone. Awesome. And next slide. We also want to introduce to you today Miss Joanne Zeiss. Oh. She graduated with a master's degree in public history with a concentration in history, preservation. Ms. Zeiss is the South Carolina State Museum Curator of Cultural History. She worked at the University of South Carolina McKissick Museum from 2008 until 2012, when she accepted the position as Curator of Cultural History at the South Carolina State Museum. She has curated exhibitions on topics from military to fashion, prehistory to the space age, and used a wide variety of material culture to tell those stories. She has also worked on a range of public programs and tours at the museum. Without further ado, I bring to you Laura and Joanne as they walk us through today's exhibit, and we hope you all enjoy.
Can you unmute me? You should be unmuted. I'm unmuted. Hey everybody, how are y'all doing? I hope everyone's doing great today. It is an awesome, awesome day here at the State Museum. I'm Miss Laura. I'm the crazy robot lady that does all the weird science stuff. I saw some of our campers and some of our members hop in. I saw the names come through, so it's good to see you girls. I have missed you a whole lot. Casey, Ellie, I saw you guys pop in too, so hi, it's nice to see you again. We have missed everyone here at the museum. It's been very difficult with everything going on. We don't see as many people. We haven't been able to do in-house programming. So the second someone offers us the opportunity to teach anyone, even just virtually, we have been hopping on it because we miss you guys so, so much. So today we are going to walk around and learn a lot about women's suffrage with Miss Joanne. And then at the very end, we are going to create our own rosette. And being the science lady, my rosette has a little science girl on it. And my mask also has Girls in Science on it. So I am all about us doing some cool things that they say the boys do, but we do it just as well, if not better, right? All right, so I'm gonna put my mask on and we're going to follow Miss Joanne around. When you have a question, if you could put it in the chat, and if she's not going to answer it, she'll see me raise my hand and I'll ask the question for you, okay? All right, so I'm gonna switch places with Miss Joanne.
Hello, everyone. So great to have you here today at our exhibit, and I hope you guys get a chance to come see it in person. Now, we're going to go over a lot of stuff virtually, but it would be a great experience for you to bring friends and family to come in and see the exhibit. So if you're going to do that, I would encourage you to do that as soon as you can, because the exhibit is going to close at the end of September. So even though we're going to cover a lot and we're going to have a great time, it's still so fantastic to come and see stuff in person. So we really appreciate you being with us today. And if we have any like gremlins in the comments or anything, just bear with us, and we will try to get to everyone and try to cover everything smoothly. All right. So are we ready to hit the road in this exhibit? All right. Let's start with this wonderful display behind our suffragettes, who are all dressed up for suffrage. Now, suffragists generally wore white, and they had like these colors also. So purple and gold were suffragist colors, as well as white, and a lot of those colors have to do with the idea of purity and justice and those kind of things. So that's why we have our suffragists out there. But we have this great collage of South Carolina women behind me. I mean, just from all kinds of time periods. And these are all South Carolina women that you can find out more about. And this is just a small sampling of some of the amazing women who have made a huge difference for good in South Carolina history. Now, there's one lady up here I think a lot of you might recognize, and she's the one person here I would say who would not say she's really a South Carolinian, but I put her up on the wall. And I wonder if we can maybe see her up there and see. Do you guys know, can we get her up there? You guys know who? We're not quite there. There we go. There she is. Harriet Tubman. Have you guys heard of Harriet Tubman? Have some hand raising. Raise your hand. Shake your head if you can. Awesome.
Head's nodding.
So why is Harriet Tubman up there when she wasn't from South Carolina really? Well, that is because she did an amazing thing in South Carolina for women's history. So down in Hilton Head and Beaufort, she led an army raid that freed enslaved people right here in South Carolina. And she was a woman doing that in the 1860s. So that's a huge moment for women's history that happened right here in our state. And she's an amazing woman. And it's an example of, you know, Abraham Lincoln did pass the Emancipation Proclamation and all of these things, but it took people like Harriet Tubman and real people who put their feet on the ground and really put those papers, those laws into action. So it takes everyone doing that, from the president all the way down to awesome people like Harriet Tubman and the great heroes who followed her to freedom. So let's head on into the exhibit itself. You're seeing this is sort of the outside gallery. And the exhibit starts long ago. We don't focus only on suffrage in this exhibit. We actually talk about women's history politically in the state, and we actually talk about the Native women of the nations and we start about the time that Europeans came to this country. So what was life like for the women in South Carolina at that time who were a member of different nations? And there were about 16 Native nations at that time. One of the ones you may have heard about, and if not, you are in for a treat when you learn about the Lady of Cofita-Chiqui, who was actually a leader of her nation. She was the one when De Soto came through as a Spanish explorer. He came to her, and she was the leader of her nation, which in Native nations, especially in the area we're in the Southeast, that was not that uncommon. In fact, power actually flowed through the women of these nations. So it's a word called matrilineal. That means it didn't necessarily matter who your father was, it mattered who your mother was, which those of us who come from a European background who study European history, we often think of kings and princes, but it was very different in a lot of these Native nations.
I think it froze for a second.
Reactions to the fact that women have so much political power. So women occasionally often went on war parties with some of these nations when they were at war with each other. They had separate spears, so to speak. So women did a lot of the planning and farming and making clothes and baskets, and men would often go on hunting parties or during the war seasons. But while separate, they were equal. So women's work was not looked down on. It was not lessened. It was recognized as very important. So these things kind of clashed when the Europeans came through. And Europeans, often what we know about these native people is through their eyes. So as a historian, we have to remember that the source we're reading about these people had a view about their people that they were writing into it. Does that make sense? How we have to view people like that and look at our sources, that's an important thing for historians. But we have great pieces in here that help us really bring those stories to life. So what we have here are some scrapers and pots from thousands of years ago. And women were actually, based on a lot of archaeology and anthropology that we have, women would be the ones actually doing a lot of the scraping. And when I mean scraping, I mean, let's say a hunting party went out and it got an animal, and you needed to make leather for that. So the women would actually be the ones using these scrapers to scrape off and prepare that to make leather and animal hides so that they could have clothing and that kind of thing. Oh, forgot to do my phone. So that, and they also were a part of the pottery making. And even today, the Catawba pottery in the upstate is very closely associated with the women of that tribe. So that is an interesting way to think about women's political history in the state. And actually, when your host talked about Susan B. Anthony, when she and other women at that time were talking about women having political rights, they actually mentioned these women. So they were saying, look, women have had political rights before, so let's do it again in this country. So it's a really important part of understanding suffrage. And then down here we have some more, these are more colonial objects, and especially this beautiful porcelain here. It's really pretty. So this is what would have been at the fanciest of tables. These are actually from a plantation called Broomfield Plantation. And when you look at history, and maybe the next time you go to a historic site or something, I want you to, instead of thinking about the man the building might be named for, or the architect they mentioned, thinking about the women who would have lived there, done a lot of the planning. So for example, the porcelain that this house came from, it actually passed through the woman. And when she passed away, it all went to the man she married. So she's the one who brought the wealth to that family, and he's the one that went on to political prominence. So think about that when you're looking at history. Women are always about half the population, so they've always got something to add to our history. Now this next to it, when we talk about colonial South Carolina, a lot of the power that South Carolina had, and it was a really politically powerful place, was based on the wealth made by enslaved people. Early in South Carolina's colonial history, the majority of enslaved people were actually women brought to this colony, which is, I think a lot of people don't realize that. So very early in the history, it was these.
It froze up again, so let's give it a second, let it buffer out. This is really good. I'm learning so much. I think it might have, did they drop, Lindsay?
A little bit later at the time. And these two lovely ladies. So a lot of you may have heard, especially if you're a native South Carolinian, of Eliza Lucas Pinckney and her work with indigo. I know I learned that story way back in the day. And this is a drawing of what she probably looked like. And then next to her is this other woman called Elizabeth Timothy. Now, Elizabeth Timothy was the first female newspaper editor in America. That is really awesome. In Charleston. Now, another thing I would think about when we talk about women's history is while these women were out doing some really cool things and big, they were not all about women's rights. So these women were not about getting women the right to vote necessarily. They were not about making more rights for women necessarily. They were very invested in keeping the status quo. These were wealthy women. So while we can appreciate the things they did, it's important to remember that not all women had the exact same concerns or desires for the country. And I know that's a little hard to wrap our mind around, but it's really important for us to understand the depths of history and how things happen, right? All right, let's move along a little bit further. And let's talk about this. Now, we were talking about Native women earlier, and what we have right here is this absolutely gorgeous, I hope we can see it, bag right here. And what I really love about this bag is what it tells us about Native women in the early 1800s. So I mentioned a little bit about Europeans looking on Native cultures very negatively. And one of the things they wanted to do was something called assimilate, and a cultural change their culture to be more like the European standards. And that's something that as they moved through and settled that area, they wanted to change culture. And this bag kind of tells that story a little bit. So what we have is this beautiful bag, and this was made by a Cherokee maker in 1820, but it was made specifically for a European market. So the women who were using the scrapers hundreds of years ago, they had a very different role in their community than these women did. So these women were no longer allowed to work and trade with Europeans because the European men would not trade with women or would not work with women. And their work was beginning to be less valued. Now this has changed happily in the more modern era. So we have had Wilma Mankiller was the first female chief of a tribe, and that was of the Cherokees. So a lot has changed, but this is a beautiful purse that was made by an amazing maker. And not only do you have the typical beading that Cherokee, that has a long tradition in Cherokee culture, but then you have this embroidery that is very European. So you see these cultures coming together. So that's a fun. And if there are questions, don't forget to let us know. Now here we have this little writing desk. How many of you are on laptops? Are you on a laptop now? Think of this as a very primitive laptop.
Lots of hands.
So this folds in half and you can carry it around. So if you want to write a letter or maybe write in your diary, you would open up your lap desk. You could put it on your lap, and up there at the top is a place for your ink and your quills and any pens or pencils you might have, or any of your writing utensils. So why is this an exhibit for women's history? Because before women could vote, that didn't mean they were necessarily silent. Women worked really hard to have their voices heard in the ways that they could. So you have a lot of women writers talking about what's going on in their lives and making those issues known. So that really happens a lot in the mid-1800s, and you have famous women like Harriet Beecher Stowe or letter writers in the suffragist movement, and they're using letters and their words to communicate. So even though avenues of power are shut off to them, they're finding ways to get their message out, and the written word is very powerful, and it remains that way. So when you're thinking about ways that you can make change, you don't always have to be in front of the TV camera. You can disseminate ideas through words and other ways too. So a very important thing. Now this big beautiful desk is huge. This is a big standing desk. You thought standing desks were new. Standing desks, I mean, look at this sucker. This is tall. This was a standing desk. And this is actually from 1840. And it was up in Greenville. Anybody from Greenville out there in the upstate? No, we are the State Museum. We covered the whole state. So this was used in 1840. That's a long time before the Civil War. 1840 by a postmaster. So how many of you have ever been to a post office? You go to a post office?
Oh, I don't think,
Anybody?
oh, a couple.
Okay,
We got a couple.
You got to read by the stamps, and you've probably seen the post office. So there used to be a job as the postmaster, which is still kind of a job. But this postmaster in 1840 was a woman, which is really a very cool thing. Think about 1840, you have this woman has a government job. Now, most women didn't even have jobs outside of the home. Let me tell you, they worked. Some would have businesses, but getting a job with a paycheck was kind of rare, especially a government one. So this young lady, this was Susan Ware Saxon of Greenville. She was the postmaster, and this was a really important job. We think about mail today as that's how it's always been, but it's not true. Back in Susan's day, when she had this big desk, and this was the desk she used as postmaster, you had to come and get your mail. They did not take it to you. You had to go to the postmaster's desk and get your mail out of this desk. And that's when you paid for it. You didn't put a stamp on it and then send it. The person sent it, and then when you picked it up, that's when you paid. That means that every piece of mail that came to the Greenville area Susan dealt with. And every person that came to get that mail, she talked to. So she knew everybody. She knew everything going on. And if you want to really put this in perspective, one of our most famous people to hold one of these jobs was out in Illinois, and his name was Abraham Lincoln. And he was a postmaster too, about the same time period. So think about how long ago that was.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
It's a really cool job. And there were actually a few women across the country. While this sounds like really, it wasn't totally unheard of. It was rare, but not unheard of. Now, thinking back to what we were talking about, Eliza Lucas Pinckney and Elizabeth Timothy, who owned the newspaper, the way Susan got this job was that her husband was the postmaster, and when he died, she kind of inherited the job. Now, she did great at it by all we know, and she had it for quite some time. But this was very common, was that a woman who had a position often inherited it, because these jobs often were kept in the family. So when her son was old enough, she then gave the job, was passed to her son. So I want to like rock about Susan, but I also want to keep it in perspective. Like, this was not like we want to think of everything as, you know, the beginning of feminism, and that word wasn't really around quite at this time. It was getting there. But let's put it in perspective. So Susan was rocking it, but that was part of the deal. There's a question, yay!
Brooklyn wants to know if all this is happening before cars.
Oh, much before cars. So yes, there were not cars. You would get around on horses, although most people walked. I mean, everyone thinks there are horses. There were horses, but generally people walked anywhere they wanted to go. If you had the money and the resources to have a horse, even one, that was pretty well to do. Because usually if you had a horse, it was for the farm, which is different than a riding horse. And then you might have a buggy, or you might have a wagon. And so getting around was usually done by foot, or on water. But yes, definitely before cars, before really bicycles, although there were little get around machines. Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay, let's go. All right, we talked a little bit about writing, and I want to point out right here, this is a first edition of Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And that was written right before the Civil War, and it was impact on how people saw enslaved people and slavery at that time. Now, there are a lot of things looking back on that book that she could have done a better job with, but it really got the conversation going. In fact, there's a story that Abraham Lincoln once met her and said, "So you're the woman who started this great big Civil War," because her ideas, once they got circulated, were really powerful. They were so powerful, in fact, that her book and this newspaper, which is an abolitionist newspaper, also trying to get people convinced that slavery was evil, were both banned in this state. So if you had a friend in Massachusetts mail you this newspaper or these books, they would go into the postmaster's office, take it, and destroy it. That's how dangerous they felt these ideas were that were being circulated by women. Now, the reason I have the Liberator newspaper here is it was published by William Lloyd Garrison, and he posted a letter that was written to him by a lady named Sarah Grimke. And that letter caused a bunch of stir. Now, I don't have an object from her other than this newspaper. Now, Sarah was from Charleston. She was born to a very rich family in Charleston, very well-to-do, and they owned a lot of enslaved people. In fact, Sarah was even, this is hard to imagine, when she was 11, she was actually gifted an enslaved girl. And Sarah, even at 11 years old, knew that this was wrong, and she spoke out against it, and she was what we call an abolitionist. And when she got older, and she was in her 30s, she wrote William Lloyd Garrison a letter. And she was trying to get other Southerners and Northerners to turn against slavery and decide that it was not a good thing for the country. And without asking Sarah, William published that letter in his newspaper, and it made Sarah famous. Famous because some people really believed in what she was doing and were coming to her cause, and then made her famous in her hometown, which she was told not to return. So she could not go back and visit her mother and family because she was told she would be run out of town. Now we all applaud what Sarah does, and she actually goes on to be, she and her sister Angelina go on to be some of the very first suffragists. And that came out of this abolition movement. So abolition and the first suffragist movement are really close together. So if you're not familiar, abolition was for those who wanted to end slavery in America. And that was a lot of women. And from that came this suffragist movement of the 19th century. So any questions on that?
Not yet.
All right, let's go on. Now we're going to talk about this beautiful quilt. And we talked about some of the ways that women make themselves heard politically. We talked about women who made objects, women who wrote letters, but women also did it through their needles. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. But this quilt right here is actually a new acquisition museum. We're really excited to have it. This quilt was made in 1861, and it was made by this woman right here, Hattie Cameron. And I know that because she wrote her name right there. It's right there. It says Hattie Cameron, August 1st, 1861. And this is also, her square is the reason that we got this quilt, because this, does that look like our state flag here in South Carolina? Yeah, it sure does. And so when we saw this, we're like, hey, that must have a South Carolina connection. And in fact, it is. This quilt was made by Hattie. This square right here, you see these different squares. She did this square, and her friends did these other squares. And there are some signatures you can still kind of see on some of these squares. And we think this was what is called a gunboat quilt, which is when women got together and in support of the government, and in this case, the Confederate government in South Carolina, they made these quilts as fundraisers. So women got together, sewed their own squares, and then got together and sewed them together and made this quilt, and then they raffled it off to raise money for something. Often it was called for a gunboat, which was a special kind of boat during the Civil War. And so these women were participating in their government by raising funds for it. And one of the things I really like about this quilt is you can really see the individual hand of each woman in it. And some of the women, like this woman, went way overboard. You ever been in a class project and there's the overachiever? That would be this beautiful one here. And then there are some that are like, this person like did it the night before. We call this woman corn lady because I love her. She did better than I can do, but I mean, compare these two. So you can really start seeing some great personalities in here. Now, if we come closer here, badges that were worn right at the beginning of the Civil War. So when we think about seceding from the Union and we talk about how popular that was, I want you to remember that when the Confederacy started, only very few people could vote. I mean, right off the bat, you have no women voting, so it's already less than half. And the majority of the population in South Carolina at the time of secession were enslaved, so none of those people can vote. And then you had property restrictions on who could vote. So it was actually a very small amount of people who were deciding the fate of the state, as it were. So, but some women were in support of the Confederacy, like the ones who made this quilt, or the women who made these little secession badges. So this is one actually from 1860. Now, next to it, you see this. This is currency from the Confederacy, and on it is an image of Lucy Pickens, who was the only woman to appear on Confederate currency. And this bill was actually made right across the street in a store that's now a Publix. So if you go to the Publix when you're at the museum, this is where this was printed. But Lucy was married to the governor, and she actually married him a few years before that because Lucy wanted adventure, and she knew that while this man was much older than her, he was going to Russia as ambassador, and she craved adventure. So she married him and went off to Russia, and she was the favorite of the emperor and empress. In fact, they were the grandparents to her children, the godparents to her children, who they nicknamed Dushka, which is adorable, and traveled down to the family. And this is a fan she used when she was at the highest levels of politics in Russia, which is kind of interesting to think about a South Carolina governor's wife doing. So women are making all kinds of. Now, we don't spend a whole lot of time in the Civil War and this exhibit because it's really only 5 years. And politically speaking, the Reconstruction period is way more important for women's history because we had a time of really great progress for rights in the state. So women were actually given control over their property for the first time during Reconstruction. Women were also allowed to pursue a divorce if they needed to. Before that, they had no option to do that. Women were attending these new schools that were put out during Reconstruction. So it's really this moment, these about 8 years of real positive development for people's rights in South Carolina. Unfortunately, that was brought to a rather violent end at the end of Reconstruction, and a lot of those things were undone. So women, once again, were not allowed to divorce and lost some of their property rights to things. But it was these amazing sisters who you may not have heard of, called the Rollins sisters. And there's a picture of Frances in the back. And there were these 5 sisters, and they were from a very well-to-do, freed Black family in Charleston. And the Rollins sisters, when the Civil War was over, married several different men who became politicians in South Carolina. And the Rollins sisters, if you wanted anything done politically in this state during Reconstruction, you went to Frances or one of her sisters' houses and sat in her parlor, shared tea, and had conversation, and paid respect to these ladies because they held the gates of power. They were very influential, very highly educated, just at the top levels of power in the state. And you cannot talk about suffrage in South Carolina without these ladies, because this is where the true first organization for suffrage in South Carolina comes up. So Frances, her sister, Charlotte, or Lottie, as she was called, had the very first convention on women's suffrage in the state, and that was in 1870. The year before that, in 1869, she actually was the first woman to address the men at the State House, asking them to vote for suffrage and put it in with other legislation. And that, if you're wondering when 1860s, this is just after the Civil War. So we have these women of color addressing the men of the State House to say, give women the vote, and they were holding a lot of political power. So there's so much to learn about these women, and I'm so excited to talk about them and share their story with you. So go out and research more about them because they are amazing ladies. Now, we talked about Reconstruction came to an end, so a lot of the sisters, they moved out of South Carolina, and that was kind of the end of suffrage for that period. There was no one to lead the cause. Now, one important thing to remember about the Rollins sisters when they were fighting for suffrage, they were fighting with white women. So it was Black and white women fighting together to get women to vote in the state. So that's an important thing because suffrage has come up again in South Carolina towards 1900, so about 100 or so years ago. There's another movement for suffrage, and it's led by a lady named Virginia Durant Young, who really spearheads the suffrage movement in the state. She had a newspaper, again, women in writing, very important, and everyone who worked for her was a woman, which is very cool. But again, you have to remember that these are real live people, and Virginia, unfortunately, thought that Black women should not have the right to vote. So there were actually a lot of suffragists who were not on the same page. Some suffragists wanted every woman to have the right to vote, but women like Virginia and many others did not feel that everyone should have the right to vote. Some felt that only rich women should have the right to vote. So again, it's really about understanding the depths of history. We often want to think of civil rights as this smooth uphill battle, but it's really hard to hold a coalition together and be focused on one thing. And that's why it's really important that we make really great leaders. So you guys have a great job ahead of you, but it can be difficult. So keep trying, keep working at it. Now, Virginia passed away in about 1906. And once again, the suffragist movement kind of petered out in South Carolina without a leader. Now, one little quick thing I want to talk about here, these pants, these are like long shorts. They come down to about your knee. These are bloomers. And that was, there was a famous suffragist in the 1850s who made them Amelia Bloomer. She kind of made them famous. Other women wore them, but she made them famous. And that was kind of really associated with women's suffrage, especially in the 1900s or so. So women were starting to ride bicycles. Remember someone asked about cars? Well, bicycles come before cars, and it's a huge craze. I cannot, like in Charleston, it was just the bee's knees, as they would say. Everybody had a bicycle. And to ride a bicycle on a skirt is kind of hard. A long skirt, that's not possible, and plenty of women did it. but a lot of women wore pants to ride a bicycle. So they had, these are actually bloomers from a gym class. So it's a lot easier to ride a bike on bloomers, right? So there is this very famous saying that women are riding the bike to suffrage. So the bicycle and bloomers and this kind of sportswear thing really wrapped around the idea of suffrage. So sometimes we still talk about what women wear and get a little pushback on that. That's been going on for a long time because there are many people who did not like women wearing pants. So just wrap your mind about that. And there's actually a bicycle license right there. You actually have a license to ride a bicycle. Is that not adorable? That one's from Lancaster. Anybody from Lancaster?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, you got a bike. Next time you ride your bike, you're like, oh no, I'm not licensed. I'm uninsured. Oh no. But I mentioned that Virginia passed away in 1906 and the movement kind of fell off. Well, don't worry, we had another group of women who took on the struggle after Virginia passed away. So this is actually it's from 1920, from this time period, a real suffragist from South Carolina held this, it's a piece of paper, it's called a handbill. We have a question?
Casey and Ellie want to know, when did women start protesting to get the right to vote? When did they do that?
I would say if we want to go back to, remember when we were talking about the Grimke sisters and they were writing those letters? I don't know that they necessarily what we call protested. They had a lot of talks and they would give speeches. And a lot of times people protested them. So they would give a speech and people would throw things at them. So it was very difficult work. But I don't know that we would say they were protesting as much as being protested against.
Meredith and Audrey want to make sure that we know that Mary Poppins was in the time period of women's suffrage. But Brooklyn is also wondering a little bit about the 15th Amendment and the 19th Amendment.
Oh, the 15th. I have to remember what that one is. I only came here first for the 19th. I remember the 15th. Is that suffrage for all men? Is that what that one is? Oh, y'all caught me flat-footed.
The license to the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of race, color, or previous.
So that one came out after the Civil War. And there were plenty of women who were like, it doesn't say anywhere in here that women can't vote. It doesn't actually say in here anywhere that women can't vote. Yeah. And some of them did take that tack. And so that was a really important amendment. And remember, we've talked a lot about how women didn't always agree. When that amendment came out, there was a split in the women's movement and the abolition movement because some people wanted to focus on that amendment and getting Black men the right to vote first. It's not that they gave up on getting women the right to vote, it's that they thought we need to get Black men the right to vote and men will work on women. There were some women who were like, oh no, we need to do the whole enchilada right now. We need to get women and men the right to vote. And that was a split within the suffrage movement. Another split, speaking of amendments, is that some women wanted to go state by state by state and just change state laws. Other people wanted to go after another amendment right away, and there was a split within the women's group, again, over that. So when we're talking about these movements forward, they're always,
it's tough to get everyone to agree.
It's tough to get everyone to agree. So it really coalesced around the 19th Amendment. That may be one of the reasons it really finally propelled forward, is because everyone got together on the same page. So when we think about the 19th Amendment and women voting, we actually had a woman in Congress before the 19th Amendment. How was that? That's because out west, you couldn't vote. In Utah, and there were about 12 states out west where women already were voting. But you couldn't vote here in South Carolina. How is that possible? Because, and I want you to remember this, it's really important, voting is always local. The states have a lot of control over votes. They actually say who can and cannot vote. So in some states, if you have a felony record, you can't vote. In some states, it might be based on other things. So it's really important to get locally involved in your elections and find out what matters in your state. So in some states, you can't vote if you don't have ID, and others you can. And these laws change all the time. So it's really important to not just assume things are going to be the way they should or have always been the way they should. So always be cognizant of that and be paying special attention to your local laws and elections, because it's really very local. Even from county to county, you get a very different voting experience, right? Because one county might have the best newest stuff, county next door might have one polling station, and it's really tough to vote. So that's a really great question, a really great thing to point out about the other amendments and how women got together. And in 1919, when we get the 19th Amendment, it was women like this was actually owned by Shirley Black Brown, and she was a USC student. And it was her and other women like her that really coalesced in these few years before the 19th Amendment to really push for a national amendment. So you have women like Alice Paul, who's a very famous national suffragist, but she was joined by a South Carolina lady named Anita Pulitzer, and they chained themselves to the White House gate, which is pretty intense, right? So they were at Woodrow Wilson, whose pin is chained themselves to the gate, and they said, President Wilson, you talk about liberty, you talk about rights, but what about rights for women? And so these women brought national attention to it, and they were arrested, they were treated awfully, people threw things at them, spit on them, abused them, and they were fed, and all of that brought a lot of attention to the women's movement. And Woodrow Wilson actually changed his mind. Originally he was against it, but a lot of people credit the work that women suffragists did in fighting and making and protesting. These were actual more protests that changed his mind, bringing that kind of, people don't give you rights because you ask nicely, I guess is sort of the, you have to have a many strategy layers, from changing the laws, watching things out, and being vocal about it. So, and Woodrow Wilson, if you don't know, spent his boyhood in Columbia. You can visit the house, just FYI. So we did have women voting. So this is actually a headline from the newspaper when women were first president here in America. So this is November 2nd, 1920. This is a story, and this is using language of the time. So this is a 1920 newspaper. But you have, it talks down here about something that's very interesting. No managers appeared at most boxes. Well, what does that mean? Well, let me tell you. All across the state, women went to vote, and guess what? No one was at the polling station. Now, was this on purpose or an accident? The records aren't entirely clear, but you know what these really cool women did? They said, well, I'm gonna volunteer, and they got the job done. So they sat down and they ran the polling station if the manager didn't show up. Like, they got involved and they got it done. And so, and this was, there are several reports of this all across the state. So that's sometimes you have to get that nitty gritty into it. And we often think, you know, we just go push a button and that's how you vote. Sometimes you got to work for it. And with all the things going on right now, a lot of us are, you know, thinking about how we're going to vote in a safe way. So voting has always kind of been difficult for some people, right? Because we always have to remember, we passed the 19th Amendment. Carolina, in the first election, we had a good number of Black men were able to register to vote, but then after that, they put in these laws and barriers that kept all women from voting. So once again, we had to fight to get everybody the right to vote, right? So always remember that about 19th Amendment. And we've talked a lot about how women had very diverse opinions. And a lot of people put the suffragist movement with prohibition. That's a fancy word. Anybody know what prohibition means? Anybody heard that before? Raise the hands.
Prohibition. Anybody? One or two hands. Yeah, I'll get some thumbs up.
So those were women who were really committed to outlawing any alcohol sales. So no alcohol. And this is a part, we have a whole discussion on this. But they saw it as a detriment to the family. So alcoholism was a very big factor in this. And so a lot that suffragists were really behind this movement. And that's a little true. There were a lot of suffragists who were also very into prohibition. And actually a lot of women who worked in prohibition were against suffrage because they thought, well, we got prohibition passed. Why do we need to vote? We don't need it. Because not all women wanted women to vote. So again, wrap our minds around that. But there are plenty of women, as we see over here, who are like, we should have the right to drink if we want to drink whatever we want. And so these women were called the Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform. And it's just sort of highlighting the idea that women have a lot of diverse viewpoints, right?
Right, yeah. Look at that, yeah.
And then over here, so we have a couple of cases of women participating in politics. So we have the South Carolina League of Women Voters who came out of the suffragist movement. We have women running for office. Here we have a credit card, which you may not think is really a political thing, but if you'll notice on here, it says Mr. and Mrs. And it was not really until 1974 that Congress granted that women could have credit. Because before that, you could deny a woman credit. She would have to have a husband or a brother or a father sign for her credit card, which that's really politically important to be able to have access to credit and banking. So that's, we may not always think about banking as political, but it certainly can be. So for example, Modjeska Simpkins worked at this bank right here, the Victory Savings Bank, and she actually used the bank to help civil rights protesters who would be met with economic reprisals. So let's say you were a black man and trying to vote, and when you tried to vote, they then took away your business or denied you loan or upped your rent. And Modjeska got the bank to help a lot of those people, most famously the people who were involved in the Briggs v. Elliott case, which sounds all complicated, but if you've heard of Brown versus the Board of Education, which ended segregation in schools. That case actually started in South Carolina with Briggs versus Elliott case, right here in South Carolina. And Modjeska was critical to getting that, and those people were met with economic reprisals, and she got the bank to politically active and awesome.
Very, very cool.
Very cool. Here we have all kinds of buttons that once again represent all kinds of different political views. And then behind us, we already talked a little bit about what women wore. So here we have the mini skirt. Some people bloomers 100 years before mini skirts now, right?
Yeah.
Right? And then here we have a suit worn by Chief Justice Jean Toll, who was the first female chief of the South Carolina Supreme Court, which is awesome. She is the one who swore in Governor Nikki Haley. So you had Governor Nikki Haley being sworn in by Justice Jean Toll. I'm sure like 200 years ago, mind's blown. Never thought that would happen, but it happened. And then as we move on to more modern times, we have more participation as the civil rights movements allows more Black women especially to come in and have those seats at the table and come into positions of leadership and power in the state. And then we kind of end here with this suit, which was so graciously loaned to us by Ambassador and former governor and first female and person of color governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley. So this is the suit she wore when she was inaugurated, and Justice Jean Toll did that for her. So
very, very
I'm at the end of the exhibit,
cool.
and we've covered a lot.
We have covered
I feel
so
like
much stuff. Alrighty, so I'm going to put us into position, and then we can start taking some questions.
Okay.
So does anybody have any questions or anything? And we can kind of do this at the same time if we want as our activity. That kind of might be a good use of our time. So do you want to hop back here and look at the questions? And I'll come to this part?
That's perfect. Like I say, we're learning.
Okay, so what we're gonna do, well, this is all new to us. We've done tours like this before, but we've never had like this set up. So we're kind of figuring some things out. So what I'm gonna do until we see a question, Ms. Jen, if you just raise your hand, I'll stop so that we can answer it. I'm gonna go over how to make one of our rosettes. So this is kind of similar to maybe the swap gifts that you guys make for each other in Girl Scouts. So like Joanne was saying, people would make different things to, you know, say what they believed in and you know, things that they really believed in and things that they thought were right. So what you're gonna do is you're going to make your own rosette, and it can represent anything. And like I said earlier, I am very passionate about girls in science, so I put my little Lego science girl on there. It's a little Miss Laura that some of my campers gave me at one point in my career here. So, and there are a lot of ways to do this. So we had a whole PowerPoint and everything, but I'm not gonna take up too much of your time. I could see some people getting a little tired back there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna talk to you about the very, very easiest way to do this.
Will there be a handout?
There's no handout, but if you want to email me, I can send you some things if you want. But to make this one, all I did was I went online and I Googled flower pattern. And I got these, and that's it. So you can find some flowers online if you want to. They can be any design you want. And that's all I did. So I found these flowers, I colored them in, and then I cut them out. And after I cut them out, I went ahead and put them together. Now I did it with a brass brad, and I'm going to show you what that is real fast. It is one of these little things right here. That's a brass brad. It's the little prongy thing, okay? And I put it through both of my sheets to get it to stay so that I could hold all of my pieces together. And you can see very clearly that I colored it when you look at the back of it, right? So that's all I did. Now, if you don't have a printer, and that's the reason we didn't do a printout, because we, last time we did this, we had some people who didn't have a printer and they couldn't do the activity. If you don't have a printer, that's okay. You can take a blank white sheet of paper and draw your own flowers and color those flowers and cut them out. That's totally fine too. So what you're going to do is make some sort of flower design. You're going to color it, you're going to cut it out, and then you're going to make a smaller one and a smaller one. And you can do all kinds of different designs. If you look it up, there are tons of designs out there. The other thing that you can do is a little bit more complicated. Oh, do we have a question?
We have a question, but we can come back to it if you want to keep going on this. Or
no, go ahead, do the question, and then I'll do this next.
So the question was about the sashes, and is that related to the Girl Scout sashes? And honestly, I do not know. I do know that there were a lot of suffragists in the Girl Scouts, and we have a great collection of historic Girl Scout costumes or uniforms that we have, and I would love to show them to you someday. We're actually kind of working on that. But it was just a normal way that lots of, like, you wore this for whatever you happened to be protesting or celebrating or whatever. So the design is not special to the suffragists. The colors are. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, so it makes it really, we'd love to see that soon. Lindsay, thank you for giving everyone my email address as well. So she typed it into the chat. So you're welcome to email me if you want some examples, but I just Googled it and those were the first two that I came up with. Now, another thing you can do involves construction paper. Sorry. So it involves construction paper. You can get your different colors of construction paper. You can cut out thin strips of it, either hamburger or hot dog, doesn't matter. And after you do that, you'll have these little friends right here, just really thin strips. What I do at that point is I poke a hole in each side with a pencil, and then I take another one of those little brass brads, the little things I showed you before, and I put it in one side, and then I put it through the other. And what I'm doing is I'm making a little petal, okay? Now this is what I believe is called a cockade, is the flowery part of the rosette that we're making. So you just take the different slips of it and you just put it on the brad and you keep doing that and you keep going around in a circle until you make whatever design you want to do. I've got, our suffrage movement.
Or it's like that palmetto one we saw in the exhibit, the one from 1860.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you just keep on stacking them on top and you end up with kind of like a 3D sort of structure. And you can keep going until you make an entire flower, and then you can make shorter strips and shorter strips. The shorter you make the strips, the smaller your flowers get. And once you get a complete petal, you can of course put something in the middle of it that you believe in. Now, it doesn't just have to be girls in science, or it doesn't have to be women's rights. You might be really passionate about homelessness, or maybe you're really passionate about the earth and recycling and making sure that we're all taking care of the earth. Maybe you're really passionate about animals and pets and animal rights. So there are different things that you can be really, really passionate about and really, really, struck by, and something that you really want to support. And that's what these things are. And that's what Miss Joanne was saying in the exhibit. And that's what all of these women were saying. We want the right to feel something, and we want the right to be able to feel that way. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. Whether you believe in it or not, it's your opinion about it, and you have the right to voice that opinion. Now, whether we all agree with it or not is different, but you have the right to voice that opinion. So this is another way to do it. And then the very last way to do it is a way that I don't have in here. That is actually using actual ribbon. And that, if you email me, I will send you a video on that because I don't have that right here. But you essentially use these strips like I have here. And you kind of fold them in little triangular patterns like that. And it'll start to fold on itself. And you just take some thread and you start threading inside, and it'll hold together, and you start to make this little outward rosette pattern. It's a little complicated. Oh yeah, actually, Joanne's right. Yeah, it's that right there. So that's the rosette that you can make. They're made out of fabric. I don't have needle and thread with me here or anything, and we're not in our classroom, so that's why we can't do a full studio thing. But those are a few different ways to make it. Very, very simple. My favorite one is simply the coloring and cutting out and making that. And like I said, they're little swap gifts. So if you maybe wanted to do this out of felt, you could make a swap gift for all of your friends for attending this, or maybe coming to the museum. You could put a little shark in the middle of it if you come and visit the museum or something. So lots of really cool things that you could do for it. And again, you can put anything you want to represent in the middle. And they can be best friend things as well. I know Casey and Ellie are wondering that too. So yes, absolutely. So anything you want to do, anything you want to design, you're just putting stacks of flowers on top of each other and something that means something to you in the center of it.
A voice of your own.
A voice of your own. Wow, it's like it came full circle. So, this has been really interesting. We've never quite, I wish you guys could see our setup because it is taped within an inch of its life at the bottom. Normally we have this big classroom with like 3 cameras set up, and like we've got like overhead cameras and wide view and everything. But this time we were like, we're gonna go on the road with this thing, and we're gonna travel, and we're gonna see what we can do. And we tested out the Wi-Fi, and we tested out the cart, and we've got a little squeaky cart. It's a little squeaky down there. But I think it worked pretty well. I want to thank Miss Joanne, who did an amazing job. I kind of said, whoa, hey Joanne, guess what we're doing on this day? And she, oh my goodness, thank you so much, Joanne. You just rocked it out. You're amazing. And I want to thank you all for being here. This has been really fun and a great first experience. We're hoping to do more of these things. If you haven't, we have lots of really cool stuff that we do at the museum, including camps, and we do family science nights and things. So stay tuned to our evening events and keep track of our website, because we've got lots of really cool stuff coming up with maybe some costumed characters like the Hungry Caterpillar, and all of it's going to be virtual. We do have some in-house things happening as well, but it'll be virtual as well, so you can attend from the comfort of your jammies. Do we have any questions for me or Joanne? Yes.
I think we have a question for everybody, but Laura, you can answer this, and then maybe I'll try to answer it. Okay. What is your favorite part of the exhibit?
My favorite part of the exhibit? I love the clothing.
Oh.
I'm a big fan of making a statement through what you're wearing or how you look. So I'm Latina. I'm one of the few Hispanic employees we have. And so I tend to wear, and nobody on our staff really notices it, but I tend to wear sometimes when we have somebody coming over that's really important, something of my heritage, just to kind of, you know, stand out myself. I tend to either wear a Mexican flag somewhere, maybe a Spanish flag. I'm from Mexico and Spain. So I'm a big fan of making a small statement with whatever you're wearing. So I always love the clothes. I find the clothes absolutely fascinating, how that mini skirt, which it's actually not as short as a lot of the skirts I've seen, could be such a big deal, you know, or the color of your clothing, or how the pleats make this difference, or how white could mean purity, you know, or the fact that you're wearing a hat, or is your hair up, or is your hair down? All of these things can make a huge statement. And I think that's really cool and really important. What about you, Jen?
It's like asking me to pick my favorite kid. It's really hard. It's seriously like asking me to pick which child I like best. Like, I love so many of them, and the stories are fascinating. I think, although I don't have an exhibit or an object with them, I think the Rollins story is really important to get out as we talk about the suffragists and women doing important political things. But the other thing I don't have an object with is the Charleston hospital workers strike that happened in 1970, and that was a labor, civil rights, and women's issue that brought national attention to the state. And I don't think enough of us, and especially ladies, realize that, because whenever we look at history, we have to think about those layers, and we've talked a lot about that. So in the civil rights movement, we often learn a lot about the men who led that movement, but not about the women. So we had these amazing ladies down in Charleston who went on strike, and it was a movement led by women. It was mostly done by women, and it's an amazing story. And we're actually going to screen a video of that, a documentary, in the coming weeks. So watch out for more information about that. Yeah, question.
So a lot of people are saying that they liked everything. They like the clothing, the quilt, the writing box is getting a lot of love. But someone wants to know, so were women empowered through newspapers? Did they feel like that was their voice and not just a way to be seen but be heard?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of women, and we talked about Elizabeth Timmy, the first female publisher, or Virginia Durant, who ran her own newspaper. And that was that's a pretty suffragist standard newspaper. So a lot of women, if they had the money, and again, when we think about also men and women, we have to think about class when we talk about these things. If they had the money, they could get a printing press and print their own newspaper for days and get their message out there. So it was a really important way. Think of it as the internet of its day. And so you'd have these little snippet conversations going on with the newspapers, and then letter writing like Sarah. So people wrote back in that newspaper to refute what Sarah Grimke wrote. So going back and forth with these little snippets of information. So it's kind of a parallel and a way to think about what's happening today, kind of a way to bring us closer and maybe understand how things, maybe the medium changes a little bit, but how we express ourselves continues. So yeah, newspapers were really important for women who could afford them.
Very, very cool. All right, Sophia is asking, when they were on hunger strike in England, they put tubes and stuff in their mouths and everything to feed people?
Yeah, we didn't go too far into that because it's really horrific. So I mentioned Alice Paul, and some of you may have heard of her. So Alice Paul was an American, but she went over to England to learn how the suffragists over there were doing it, because Alice Paul thought they were making more progress. So she went over there and learned those tactics about really protesting, because we talked about protesting now. And Alice Paul, they were protesting, and so chaining yourself to gates, refusing to eat, and being force-fed. So she went over there and brought those tactics back to America, and a lot of suffragists they did not want to do that. And Alice Paul was like, look, we really need to do this. We have to put this attention. We have to protest. And the Anita Politzer, who I mentioned, who was from Charleston, her and her sisters were very big in the national movement. So Alice Paul and Anita Politzer knew each other, and they were there protesting, and they did go on hunger strikes, and they were force-fed, and it's a terrible, terrible thing that they do to force this food into women. And it was the attention that those women got by suffering these indignities, and I mean also the general public treated them in really terrible ways, and that attention put a lot of pressure on people to address the issue. Now, I'm not saying go out there and go on a hunger strike in any way. We can't forget the other women who were out there quietly in their neighborhoods, going door to door, giving out handbills, talking to people one-on-one. There are many spots to fill in positions of leadership and change, and you have to find the one that works best for you and what you want to accomplish. So not everyone has to be out there chaining themselves to things. Like we pointed out with Harriet Tubman, is the people down on the ground as well, who we don't always hear about, who are really putting those changes forward. So remember that.
Well, that's a big, I feel like that's a big point of constraint whenever it comes to an issue, is that different people want to express it in different ways, and we all want to protest in our own ways. And how do we, have a unified opinion that we're all protesting different ways as well? Yeah.
And if it gives you any, it's always been difficult, but remember that it will always be difficult. And for real change to happen, it takes a lot of effort. No one gives it away. So you have to fight, and not just, like I said, not just chaining yourself to gates. Some of us are more about, somebody had to do the accounting for those groups. Somebody had to be the secretary to take all the minutes that historians now rely upon. There are a lot of roles, and there's a role for everyone. So whatever you're passionate about and however you want to fill in that role is really important that you do that, especially as women, because we have about 52% of voters are women. Again, in positions of power, women are not there yet. So it's really important that we start from the bottom up and get women at all levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very cool. Some people are saying, thank you, they really liked it. Catherine made a rosette. Yeah, if you have a rosette and you want to show it to everybody, that would be really, really cool to see. I did see some people making theirs in the background at the same time that we've been doing Q&A, which is exactly what we were hoping for.
Yay!
Sometimes just sitting and doing the activity is a little, not the most exciting thing. So it's nice to ask questions at the same time. That looks great. Those are very, very cute. Good job, y'all. All right, do we have any other questions or anything? Anything you guys are curious about? It can be about the exhibit or maybe another exhibit, or any of our upcoming events or anything. Any other questions? It doesn't look like it. So I'm going to pass it back to Lindsay and Kyle now. And you can let us know if we need to do anything.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, Kyle, are you about to go? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I really want to thank, Miss Joanne and Laura. You ladies did a fantastic job. I know we all learned something. I know I learned a lot, especially about the Rolling Sisters. Did not know about that. So that makes me want to go to Charleston right now and get as much information as I can, because that was so cool. Ladies, Girl Scouts, thank you all for being a part of this awesome virtual tour. As Laura and Joanne said, this was their first time doing something like this, and I'm so happy that it started with Girl Scouts. But I hope this was inspiring to you all. We heard some great stories, and I just love what Laura and Joanne have been speaking to you all today about being empowered. That's really what Girl Scouts is about, is just empowering yourselves so then you can empower others. And so who knows, from years from now, your picture might be on that wall for South Carolina, or if you choose to move elsewhere but still do the good work of Girl Scouts, your picture could be a part of an exhibit. How cool is that? How cool is that to be a part of a movement like that? So I really thank you all for taking the time to be on. Please know that we did record this, so we are going to post it to our website. There's just some great information that we want to make sure all of our girls are able to have at their fingertips, because we know some kids have gone back to school. And so we want to make sure that everyone has this. Kyle, I want to pass it back to you to give your words of thanks as well.
So yeah, I definitely want to thank the South Carolina State Museum. If y'all ever at the Leadership Center, they are directly across the street. They are our neighbors, they are our friends, they are our supporters, and we support each other. So please, 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 when COVID kind of goes bye-bye, please go and support the South Carolina State Museum. They have wonderful exhibits. They have some exhibits that's always there, stationary, and then they have the evolving ones or the rotating ones. So please go to their website, support them, because they support us, and that's what it's all about. So thank you to Laura and Joanne. We appreciate you. This was absolutely, I've learned so much. I'm sorry, but I'm a notes taker type person. So I took notes. I have absolutely no idea. Maybe I'll be on Jeopardy one day and they might ask a question on women's rights suffrage, and I'll get it right and I'll win the true daily double. I have no idea, but I thank Girl Scouts. I thank y'all for being here. Hopefully y'all got something that has been very beneficial and that will inspire you and motivate you to then go out and then make history, man. Her history, HERSTOR, not just history, your history. So you have anything else, Lindsay?
Exactly.
I do not.
South Carolina State Museum, do y'all have anything? Any last parting words?
No, thank y'all so much for your support. We can't wait to do this again with something else, maybe science, robotics, other history stuff, art. We've got so many cool things in art and everything. So just let us know how we can partner. If you or your troop have anything that you're interested in doing, shoot me an email and stay tuned for all of our stuff. We love our Girl Scouts. We love, love, love our Girl Scouts. So we'll see you later. And bye, campers. I saw some of you earlier. So bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful Wednesday.